I'm Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and this morning we've got a presentation on keeping your memory sharp with focus with Jill Jones. Jill has been a longtime volunteer over at TMC for Seniors, so we appreciate her being with us today as part of our Brain Health series that we're doing this month. So Jill, we're so happy you're here, and if you want to go ahead and get started, that would be great.
Okay, thanks for being here, everyone. I'll get my slides up here. Okay, so this presentation is about our ability to hold our attention long enough to do a task. It's about our ability to focus. And so now if I ask you a question, when in your lifetime, if you look back on your life, when do you think your brain was at its peak performance? What year? What age would you have been when your brain was at its peak performance? Well, the answer is 18. 18 years old in our early 20s is when our brain is at its best. And then after that, with just normal brain changes, normal brain aging, we start to decline. Our cognitive abilities start to decline, and it's very gradual over time. So what I want to do is explain why focus is key. Our ability to focus is key to a sharp memory. And I'll show you the latest research in that. And the research deals with the most recent research in how our brain is changing. And then give you some strategies so that, especially during this time of COVID, we keep our brain and cognitive abilities sharp and keep our brain as young as possible. So I have another question for you. When you're reading a newspaper or reading a book, did you notice, and as we're getting older here, did you notice that it's more difficult to concentrate, that you might have to go back and reread a section because you lost that thought? So you read it, go back and reread it again. Or another example might be if you're watching a news show. I watch the NewsHour every day, and the journalists are reporting from their homes now. Many of them have bookcases behind them. So we're paying attention to the books and what are they reading a lot of time instead of listening to the news. We're distracted. We seem to have more distractions as we're getting older. And so what I have to do, of course, is I record the news, so I just go back and replay it. And I've had to replay it a few times. But it's important for us to be aware of this, to notice if we are losing our ability, if something's stealing away our attention, those distractions. Because losing our ability to focus, our ability to hold our attention on a task, that is one of the signs of cognitive aging. And so focus is about holding our attention long enough, like I said, holding it long enough to complete a task while we filter out any distractions. So an example might be you walk into a room to get something, and when you get to that room, you forget why you're there. Somewhere along the line, something stole your focus. Something distracted you. That's usually what happens. And so this is Dr. Adam Gazzaley. He is one of the foremost authorities in the area of how our brain changes as we're getting older. He's been doing this work for close to 30 years. And you can see by his credentials here, he's a neurologist, an MD, and a psychiatrist. He's also a professor at UC San Francisco. And he has been in his lab at the university at UC San Francisco. He's been studying how older adults' brains compare to younger adults, like men and women in their 20s, especially in the area of attention and memory, because those are some of the things that change as we age. Dr. Ghazali is also an inventor, and he develops diagnostic tools for the brain, and also tools to enhance cognitive control. So he's an inventor. He comes up with these technology type of tools that can enhance our cognition and actually hopefully make our brain younger, improve our attention and memory. When Dr. Ghazali does these tests in his lab, he gives a simple memory test, and the subjects have their head in a scanner. So while they're taking the test, he can see not only just how they're doing in the test, but what's happening inside their brains while the brains are in the scanner. And what he found was that people who perform well on memory tests have a much better ability to block distractions. People who perform less well, it's like they have a leak. You know, we can't block those distractions. We can't filter out distractions. And what he also found, which was kind of a breakthrough, is that the mechanisms in the brain, the networks in the brain that are responsible for holding our attention, those are different brain networks than the ones for blocking distractions. So it's two separate mechanisms in the brain. So you could be good at paying attention, but you're not able to filter out irrelevant information that's coming in. And we have a lot of that in our environment. There's a lot of distractions in our environment. So what he said is the problem as our brain is changing, as it's aging, is that we have more difficulty ignoring distractions in our environment. And I've mentioned that Dr. Ghazali is an inventor, and his whole goal here was to enhance cognitive abilities in older adults. And so I will show you some of that work later on, what he came up with. But in the meantime, I just wanted to go through a little model of memory to set a baseline to show how our memory works. And then you'll see how where focus fits in and how all these pieces fall into place. Now, there are different types of memory, and depending on the type of memory, it gets stored and processed in different ways. So that first block up there, sensory memory, a lot of people aren't aware that we have sensory memory, but that's the act of taking in all this information around us through our senses. And it's just coming in and out of our brain all the time in milliseconds. It's whatever is in our awareness. Like for instance, right now, I'm noticing, I paid attention to the air conditioner, heard the air conditioner, but there's lights, there's sounds in the street, there's all kinds of things going on that I'm basically ignoring because I'm focused on something else. So sensory memory is the memory that takes in information from our senses, and once we pay attention to something, then it moves into our short-term memory. So we can deliberately pay attention to something, that's focused, or something can grab our attention. But anyway, now we move it into short-term memory, and people, you'll see different articles and everything, people use short-term and working memory interchangeably sometimes, but they're two different things. Short-term and long-term is about the storage of memory, and working memory is how it's used. So short-term and working memory go together. It's about having information in time, in your mind, having information in your mind for a short period of time, long enough to manipulate it in some way. So for example, if you're calculating a tip in your head, you go to a restaurant, get the bill, you're calculating a tip in your head, you hold those numbers in your head while you do the mental arithmetic. That's using your working memory. Now, people who we talk about working memory in terms of size. People who have a bigger working memory can do more complex mental processes in their head. One example is air traffic controllers. They have a very large working memory capacity because they have to keep so many variables in their head at the same time when they're making all kinds of decisions about planes taking off and landing. They have to be talking to the pilots and watching different planes, being aware of the weather patterns. So they have what's called mental agility. They can switch back and forth very quickly between tasks. So people with a big working memory capacity have, actually they have bigger brains, they have more brain connections and better cognitive skills. So working memory, having a big working memory is a good thing for brain health. And the size of our working memory is determined by our genes, what we're born with, and how we use it. And that's, of course, the key to this presentation, because it's really up to us to keep our brains as sharp as possible and tax our brains throughout our lifetime. So what I thought I would do is anytime you would go for a memory test anywhere, one of the things they'll do is give you a test for working memory. And there are different kinds of working memory tests. You can even Google them. And usually it'll be a list of numbers and they'll ask you how many of these numbers you can remember over a period of time. We're going to do one with pictures. So I made up a picture with some objects on it, and I'm going to show it to you for a few seconds, and then I'll take it away, and then I'll give you a few seconds to hold it in your mind, and then I'll bring it back and ask you what changed. And so you can take this little test at home. Nobody will know how you do, but it's pretty easy. So here we go. All right, here's the picture. So just take a moment to look at it, notice what's there, notice the objects on the picture. Okay, you got it? Okay. Now, we're just going to hang out here at the beach. Hang out for about, 8 seconds or a little less. Just give you some time to hold that in mind, keep it in that working memory system. That's about enough. Then we'll come back. And now, do you notice what changed? Can you look at the picture and see something that changed there? Well, here's the answer. The dog was gone. That was pretty easy. I'm going to do one more. It's a little bit harder. So this is the original picture again. Back at the beach. Nice place to hang out. Kind of quiet. Nice clouds. Okay, here's the picture again. Now, do you notice what changed? This was just a touch harder. What I did is reverse the two guys. So anyway, all of that whole exercise was just to give you an idea of the concept of working memory and how it works. Now, how do we get from short-term memory into long-term memory? Well, that process in moving from short-term to working memory, that process is called encoding. And what we need to do there is whatever information we're trying to remember, we want to make it meaningful. we want to associate it with something we already know, and that will make it meaningful, and it'll make the memory stick, make it be in long-term memory for a longer time. So one of the things I like to use when I'm trying to remember something, like for instance, remember names, I use memory cues. And so here's an example, real life example. This is a lady and her dog that I see occasionally when I'm walking at the trail with my dog. And she introduced herself, and her name was Jerry and her dog's name's Belle. And so I thought, well, I want to remember her and Belle because I'll probably be seeing them occasionally, bumping into them once in a while at the trail. So the memory cue I used is Ben. I thought of Ben and Jerry's ice cream and Ben's Bell, which is in Tucson. Ben's Bell is an award given for kind acts. So now when I see Jerry and Belle at the trail, all I have to do is think of the word Ben. And it really helps me remember, and I haven't forgot them for years. And in one case, I hadn't seen her for a year and still remembered their name. So here's another example of a memory cue. One of the things that was confusing to me, because I don't have company over very often, is setting the table. Where does the bread plate go and where does the water go? Or another thing, if you're at a banquet or a large gathering, we don't do that nowadays, but in the old days when we used to be able to go out to these large dinners, maybe you have a person sitting on each side of you and you're wondering, okay, which one's my bread plate? Is it over to the left or the right? Because usually place settings are all close together. So what I did is I bought a book on dining skills, and they had a memory cue in there, which was BMW, bread, meal, water. And so if you're like me, I pay attention to the different brands of cars. That was easy for me to remember, bread, meal, water. Okay, back to our little memory model here. So anything that you do when you're doing a process to make the information meaningful, you're storing it, the odds of storing it and keeping it in long-term memory are very good. Other types of encoding techniques are visual, of course. And if you've noticed throughout this presentation, I'm using a lot of visual cues. They're helpful to me and they're helpful to you. That's the idea behind that. I like pictures. Our brain is about 30% visual processor. So having these pictures helps as well. And then this is where learning comes together. In the memory model here, when you're making new memories, learning is about acquiring new memories and storing them away for the long term. So what we want to do is learn this new information and have it available in long-term storage in our brain to be able to retrieve it later on whenever we need it. So now back to Dr. Gazzaley's work. As I mentioned, when people were taking these memory tests, and the kind of tests he was giving them was multitasking, because our brain's not very good at multitasking. So he wanted to test people, and our brains, even when we're younger in our 20s, we don't do that very well, and that really declines as we get older. And so it's definitely not good if we're in our 60s or 70s to be talking on our cell phone, even in our car when we're driving, even if we're hands-free. But in any case, what Dr. Gazzaley noticed is that of the younger, mostly younger men in their 20s, who had exceptional memory ability and especially exceptional ability to block distractions, those young men happened to be playing a lot of video games. And the types of video, and it was a certain type of video game, he called it first-person shooter. So it was kind of a violent game, but it really improved their ability to focus. And so what he then, and he could see that, he could see those mechanisms in the brain for blocking distractions. He could see how well it performed in these video gamers. So what he did is he asked the question, can video games make the brain younger? When people play these video games, they're very immersive. It's like a virtual reality. You're having a new experience. It's experiential. And because of the plasticity in our brain, it actually drives changes in our brain. Those experiences playing these video games are driving changes in the brains of the players. So now, can he create a game that older adults would want to play that could improve the brain's memory and improve our attention and our focus? So in his lab, I don't know, this was maybe 8 years ago or so, maybe longer, he did design a video game. It was a multitasking video game, and had the people who developed it for him were game developers in Silicon Valley. So he had the skills right there next to the university and teamed up with them. They developed a multitasking video game. I believe it was called NeuroRacer. It was about using a race car. And he initially had the younger folks and the older adults play this video game and see how they performed as a baseline. And of course, the 20-year-olds did way better than the 70-year-olds. Of course, the gamers, the ones who were really good at video games, they did even better than their peers. But the goal here was to see if the older adults could improve. So Dr. Gazelli gave them a laptop. They took it home, and for 1 month, they played 1 hour a day. They were asked to play the game 1 hour a day, 3 days a week for 4 weeks. So a total of 12 hours over that month. And then come back to the lab and see how they did. What do you think happened? Well, they actually played to the level of the 20-year-olds, not the 20-year-old gamers, but the regular 20-year-olds who were tested on this. The older adults, 70 years old, were able to play at that level. And not only that, he looked at their working memory and ability to focus. And he saw that that game induced a reversal in age-related deficits. So it really enhanced their cognitive ability. And of course, the way this game was played, it was fun to play. First of all, fun was one of the criteria. And the game, it was custom designed for this situation. The game adapted to the person's skill level. So it would keep pushing you a little bit harder and a little bit harder. And if it got too hard, then it would back down. But it knew what level of challenge was sufficient for you. It was able to adapt to you. So now that he proved that this could actually work, the next step, Dr. Gazelli and his team, instead of making this commercially available, they decided to create a whole new field of medicine. They decided to make a video game, a diagnostic tool, and then a video game as prescription medicine. And what they did then, of course, had to take these games, and they had more than one game depending on what brain situation they were dealing with. They took their games through the FDA process for years, just like a real drug trial. And some of the games they're having go through the process treat these different illnesses: ADHD, brain injury, anxiety, memory and aging, PTSD. These are all in the pipeline, making their way through the process, except one. One actually is now available. It was the first FDA-approved prescription video game, and it is for ADHD for children. That's the first one out the gate and is available now. In fact, just last month, the press release was June 15th from the FDA. So coming to a neurologist near you, or a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or doctors are going to be able to write prescriptions for a video game for you or whoever. And as I said, this particular one is for ADHD. It's the name of the game is called Endeavor RX. The company that makes it is called Akili Interactive. So Dr. Gazzaley is the inventor. The university owns the license, but Akili Interactive, Dr. Gazzaley was one of the co-founders of that company. So I thought that was pretty exciting. But we all want to have something available now that I've told you how that our brain can change so easily. Well, there is something available commercially that's brain training exercises. So there's a brain training program. It's been on PBS a few times. This one, it's called Brain HQ. And these brain games are targeted for different areas like memory and attention and brain processing speed. They are, you can go to brainhq.com to see the website, and you can get a free trial there to play these games. The important thing here, though, and why I'm bringing them up, is because they were developed by another well-known neuroscientist. His name is Dr. Michael Merzenich. It's Merzenich. That he wrote a book in 2007, you may have heard of him, wrote a book in 2007 on brain plasticity. It was called The Brain That Changes Itself, and it introduced all of us to that concept of brain plasticity, to the lay community. Dr. Merzenich was also one of the co-inventors of the cochlear implant. He is really well known in the neuroscience community. And anyway, he led the team that created these brain training games. There's a lot of research behind it. There's a lot of validation behind it, which is really important. So if you go to their website, you will see a tab there that shows you the different research. But when they say a certain game will drive memory improvements or drive improvements in attention, you can be fairly sure that that's correct. They have a lot of science to back this. So anyway, I have a screenshot here. That's a brain game called Track the Bubbles. And that is for blocking distractions. That's the objective of that game. It's only 5 minutes long. And so what happens is they put 2 bubbles on the screen and they're moving around, and then they add more bubbles, and you're supposed to keep track of the first 2. And then at the end, point them out and see how well you do. And then of course it gets harder and harder. And because it's so easy, you only have to do them, like I said, about 5 minutes at a time. It's easy to fit into your life. And really, you can see your own improvements. You can see, and my guess is, the hope is that you would notice that you're able to concentrate better after you play some of these games. There are other brain games out there. Other companies have brain training games. They don't quite have the validation that this particular one does, though. So that's why I'm kind of recommending it, I guess. Oops. So one last thing here. It's another strategy if you don't want to, if you're tired of the computer, or if you want to do something a little different where you don't need a computer. Everybody knows there's so much research on meditation. Everybody knows that meditation improves our memory, it improves our emotional controls, it improves just our overall brain health. Well, this is a little meditation. It's only 3 minutes long, and it improves our attention and working memory. And the way it works is you'll be focusing on your breath, and you breathe in and breathe out and say 3. And then you breathe in and breathe out again and add 3. And then you keep going like that for about 3 minutes. So I'm going to walk us through it here for well, maybe 20 seconds, and you'll get an idea of how it works. So you focus on your breath, breathe in, breathe out, 3. In, out, 6. Breathe in, out, 9. Breathe in, breathe out, 12. In, out, 15. In, out, 18. In, out, 21. And so on. And then you can keep going. And so you can do that. To do it for 3 minutes, you can, depends on how fast you breathe. But generally for me, I get up to about 200 in 3 minutes. So roughly 3 minutes for a full breath, or 3 seconds for a full breath. Okay. And so that's sort of, we're getting close to the end here. I have a few more charts, but I just wanted to bring this one chart back and summarize everything. And so you can see how all the pieces fit together and how you can see the importance of focus now, that ability to block out distractions, block out irrelevant information. And as I that's one thing that changes as we age. It gets harder to do, and it's a sign that our brain's aging. So I wanted to give you some strategies to be able to work on that and regain that focus, because you can see it's key to our memory, key to our learning, and so many other cognitive skills. Now, just for fun, I have a question. Do you happen to know who would be the world's top expert on memory? This is a little quiz, a Jeopardy quiz here. This person is known as the founder of neuropsychology. In other words, the two fields, neuroscience and psychology, were merged together in the 60s. But this person is known as the founder of that new field. And one more thing, they just turned 102 on July 15th, still doing their day job. It happens to be Dr. Brenda Milner. And she is a professor at McGill University in Montreal in Canada. She has been doing research for, oh gosh, since she graduated from college. She's a British Canadian person, and so she lives in Canada, but she's still on staff at McGill University. She's known for her research in memory and cognition, and she's especially known for her study of the hippocampus and its role in memory. So Dr. Milner here on this picture, she's 96, she's just a kid. But if you go on the internet, if you want to look her up, you'll see pictures of her 100th birthday and their celebration. But I thought that was a happy note to end on. She's certainly a role model for me. And so one last thing, the core message in all of this is we need to learn to ignore things, ignore the clutter in our environment, the visual clutter, ignore a lot of these thoughts popping into our mind if we really want to focus and complete a task. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you, Jill. We really appreciate it. I do have a couple of questions that popped up during your presentation that I'm hoping you can answer as well. How does Luminosity Brain Games compare to Brain HQ? Any idea?
Yeah, Luminosity, of course, that's a different development team that did it. And they don't, Brain HQ says that they don't have the validation behind, they haven't gone through the validation exercises that Brain HQ has done. And so, and actually they had to pull back some of their advertising because they were advertising that they could, I think, prevent depression or something, or prevent dementia or something like that. And they didn't go through the proper validation processes. Brain HQ is just more rigorous research. And you can see that when you pull up their tab on research.
Oh, that's great to know. And then I also had a question about Dr. Gazalet's video games for adults. Can anyone order them or not? And if so, how?
Well, the games for adults are not out there yet. They're still making their way through the FDA process. But what you can do is your doctor, or even you, I assume, could go to the website of Akili Interactive. Go to akiliinteractive.com. And when you go to that website, that's the company that that actually licenses this technology. When you go there, they have instructions for how to get these video games. So either you or your doctor, I don't know if it matters, but you'll find out the process. And maybe it'll even tell you when the other ones, when they expect to be available.
Good. So I have to say, I always have problems remembering whether my place setting, if I've got my forks and my knives in all these years, and I've always used liquids on the right, solids on the left. But I love the idea of the BMW because I hadn't heard that before. And so you taught me a new trick today as well.
Oh.
So I love those tricks because it is confusing, and remembering names is always a challenge, I think, for all of us. And so I love that you have some different techniques that people can use as well. So thank you so much for being here today, Jill, and sharing all about ways that we can keep our memory sharp. I hope that you'll tune in tomorrow. We actually have a talk on the newest research in Alzheimer's disease, and so with the Center for Neurosciences with Margie Pazzi. So please join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. and thank you all for tuning in today. We'll see you later.
Bye.